Good evening, and thank you for joining tonight's Unmasked conversation. My name is Afeni Grace. I am the program coordinator for the Harvey B. Gantt Center. And for tonight's special conversation, we discuss the unique intersectionality of race and sexual orientation and its influence on mental health, identity, and other aspects of the Black experience. But before we get started, please be sure to click that subscribe button below the screen and visit our website, ganttcenter.org, for updates on all future Gantt Center programs and happenings. We do currently have a 2-minute audience survey linked in our YouTube chat. Please take the time to complete that survey now before we dive deeper into the discussion. And of course, audience engagement is very important to us. Please be free to use the YouTube chat for any questions or comments that you have throughout the evening. If you do have any questions for our panelists, be sure to get them in as early as possible so that we'll have time to answer them. And we will address the audience questions and the results of the survey in the second half of the program. Now I'm excited to introduce tonight's moderator, Sean Fulton. The Charlotte Black Pride Chair was born in Savannah, Georgia, and grew up there and in the Low Country. Sean loves all sports and is a huge Carolina Panthers fan. Sean is passionate about community and community building and any type of philanthropic work, and family is a huge motivator for them. Thank you for leading the discussion tonight, Sean.
Thank you so much, Afeni. I appreciate it. I'm honored to be here. What I'm going to do now is I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's awesome panelists. I also get the chance to moderate this wonderful conversation. First up, we have Aaron Steele. Aaron is a bilingual licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes in working with clients who have suffered traumatic experiences. Her primary focus is to support people as they transition from one experience to the next. Aaron is based right here in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Thank you for having
Join me in welcoming Aaron.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Our next panelist is the one and only Jermaine Nakia Lee. Jermaine is a songwriter, director, producer, arts educator, and published playwright. His musicals For the Love of Harlem and A Walk in My Shoes have enjoyed critical acclaim, sold out audiences, and national tours. For 8 years, Lee was the program manager for a 501(c) federally funded community center for LGBTQ and allied youth and young adults of color in Charlotte called the Powerhouse Project. Mr. Lee is the former education director for On Cue Performing Arts, Inc. On Cue is Charlotte's first professional African-American repertory theater. He is the co-founder of Charlotte Black Pride, South Carolina Black Pride, and Triangle Black Pride, all of which are still in existence. Join me in welcoming Jermaine Nakia Lee, please.
Good evening, everybody.
All right, our third and final panelist is Shaq Clark. Shaq is a native Canadian who has dedicated her life and career to ending homelessness among LGBTQ youth and young adults. She currently serves as the youth housing specialist at Time Out Youth Center, and this is also in Charlotte, North Carolina. Shaq runs and oversees the housing program at the center. She also works at Roof Above as the youth housing specialist. Shaq graduated from Johnson C. Smith University with a bachelor's and master's in social work. Shaq was also a lead researcher for data collection on LGBTQ homeless youth in North and South Carolina. Join me in welcoming our panelists.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so guys, we're gonna jump right into this topic. The first question directly is for Shaq. What I want to know is, in our community, in the Black community, how can we unlearn the generational trauma that we experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So for me, there's a lot of things as it relates to how can we unlearn generational trauma. So first, really, we need to divorce the idea of pray about it or leave it to God, because we wouldn't tell someone who has cancer, diabetes, or heart problems to pray about it, would we? I mean, simply we would really tell them to probably see a doctor. But when it comes to mental health, there's a very little comparison or empathy when it comes to how we talk about mental health. So for me, we need to know that we do know that fear and faith cannot live in the same space, but we also know that God can heal the soul and the heart, but not the mind and body. So it's important for us as Black people to seek a psychiatrist. And also too, what I do want to add with that too is we need to break away from the idea that being LGBT is about bad parenting. Like, where did I go wrong? So I know, like, when I came out, my mother was like, oh my God, where did I go wrong? Like, you didn't go wrong. I'm just being who I want to be, right? It's like, not being queer is not wrong, right? So we need to make space for folks to unlearn that being a parent has nothing to do about protecting or as folks are learning about their true self. And just like how we hold spaces for our emotions the way that our ancestors do, we need to be able to unexpress emotions that lead to disease in the body. Just the same way trauma can be passed down from generation to generation, so can healing. Healing could be passed down to generation to generation. So I think we just have to unlearn the habits of what our parents were taught when they were young people, and that was unconsciously or consciously passed down to us.
Right, interesting. So unlearning behavior. I would actually like to hear what the other panelists, would have to say to this question. Let's go with Jermaine. How can we in the Black community unlearn generational trauma? What do you think about it?
I think the first realization has to be that the trauma began before we were born and before our ancestors, before our grandmother was born and our great-grandmother and our great-great-great-great-grandfather. The trauma really began when we were forced migrated to the Americas. We are still today, a lot of non-people of color think this is like a cop-out or some excuse that we make for our condition in America, but we are still today mentally, emotionally, and behaviorally impacted and dealing with trauma around being forced migrated to a place, used as animals, and thought of as not even 100% human. We were thought of, this was in the law of the land at the time, that we were only a third human, and we were treated that way. We were treated inhuman for not just like 10 years or 20 years, but hundreds of years. And then we were quote unquote emancipated rather. But that emancipation did not include full rights and privileges of an American citizen at that time. So the trauma is deep, and still today, after the civil rights movement and all the other movements thereafter, still today, Black men are being shot in the back at close point range by those who our taxpayer money pays to serve and protect us. Still today, Black men and women, people of color all over this country, are being literally choked to death underfoot in broad daylight, so much so that they got to call on their mamas.
Right, right. So Aaron, what do you think about this question?
So I think that there are different levels to answering this question. When I initially heard this question, I think about within group, right? So within group, when it comes to unlearning generational trauma, well, there's two parts to it, in my opinion. There is curiosity and being willing to share your story. I think I completely agree with what Jermaine was sharing about the trauma that's passed down from our history. There's a bunch of study done on epigenetics of trauma about how trauma is written into your DNA once you experience it, and how you can pass that on to your children. And so it takes the curiosity of individuals experiencing different things to wonder, why am I doing things the way that I'm doing them? Is there something else that I could do instead? And then if they're even more curious, to talk to their mothers, fathers, grandparents, aunts and uncles about their experiences, and listen to hear and understand, but also to be curious about, is this what I want to maintain for myself? Do I want to do something different in the future? Without group or in society, I think we also have to not bombard ourselves with watching murders of our people, because we're re-traumatizing ourselves, and we're also desensitizing ourselves to those experiences. So it's about curating your social media experience, curating your entertainment, to make sure that you're not overwhelming your mind with things that are detrimental to yourself.
Right. And from my personal opinion, when it comes to generational trauma, is you don't have to be what your parents were. You don't have to be what your grandparents were. Just because they went through certain things doesn't mean you have to live as if you are currently going through it as well. Seek help, seek therapy, find a way to get around it. And like Shaq said, just like you learn that trauma is built in you and you have learned it, you can also learn how to bring peace as well. So thank you all for that. Going back to you, Aaron, you kind of spoke on it a little bit. So what I want to know from you is, are there any tools that you can provide right now that can bring down your emotional intensity? Like Jermaine just mentioned, unarmed shooting, Black man in the back. We have an initial reaction, we have initial emotions, and we may not be in the right place to show those or voice those emotions. So what tools do you have that can help us bring down our emotional intensity until we are able to express them like in our own safe space?
So I do think it's important to have a safe space, a place where you can go and talk to someone or express yourself through any type of creative way, art, dancing, singing, whatever that may be, just to get the energy out. But I also think it's really important to journal. I think it's really good to not hold those thoughts in your mind. You can put them down somewhere and know how to get back to them if you need to process them further. But I like to start my mornings off just writing. And it doesn't have to be anything in particular. It's just more of a free form, whatever comes to my mind, I put it out. And it's a way of clearing my head so that I can take in what's happening what's going to come at me in the day. As a therapist, hearing about other people's experiences and other people's traumatic experiences, there is the opportunity to have vicarious trauma. And that's basically where you're traumatized because of a traumatic experience that you hear from someone else. And so I think it's important to have a place to get that energy out of you. And for some people, they may not be interested in writing or journaling or dancing. Grounding is another thing where you take a moment to kind of just remember what is good, what is real, what works for you. For some people, it is about being in nature, about connecting to the earth. For other people, it's about sitting in a quiet space. You could have an object that you keep by your side or near you to just kind of remind you, like, there are good things in the world. There are good people in the world. There are good experiences. I think it's important for us to make sure we're balancing out the negative things that we're experiencing on a regular basis, because the world is hard. The world is harsh. And in the last 3 or 4 years or so, it's gotten worse. And so I think it's really good to just have different ways to help bring yourself down like that. And it's going to be different for everybody. And I think right now, especially since we are in a pandemic, it's important not to judge one another and not to judge yourself so harshly, because we're all figuring this out together.
Great, right. So Jermaine, how do you, what do you do? What tools do you use to help bring down your emotional intensity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm an artist. I'm a performing artist and a creative writer. So I guess since I was a kid, one way that I've always found a little release is through songwriting, or the listening to of music that fills me up. So if I'm feeling down, then I'll listen to inspirational music. But I think it's different for everybody. You know,
Right.
we live in the Bible Belt, so I know for a lot of people, places of worship are where they go for solace and for peace, and I think that is good. We also know that sometimes for the LGBT community, that those spaces, as much as we love those spaces, they don't necessarily always love us. So, if I'm a Black LGBT person and I'm a person of faith, and God is kind of like my source and my first go-to, my default mode, then I'm going to want to find an affirming house of worship. And there are affirming houses of worship in this city. Luckily, we have some in this city. I think physical fitness is another thing that I found that is truly a wonderful release. My partner is, I don't know what you would call him, a gym rat. I guess that's the best term. So his way of dealing with the day every morning is he goes to the gym. He starts his day out at the gym. Now, I didn't get that disease, so I don't necessarily have to do that, but that works for him, and it really sets a mode for him. I've never known anyone who comes from stressing themselves at the gym, but he comes back with an incredible attitude, and it sustains him throughout the day. So I think you got to find your niche. You got to find what your piece is, and be unabashed about going full throttle into that thing. For me, it's certainly creative arts. Whether it's me creating or enjoying somebody else's creation, that brings peace to me.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, Shaq, same question. What tools do you use to help bring down your emotional intensity?
Yeah, for me, I always spend time with myself in the morning. One of the things I always do, I regularly check in with myself, my body, and then automatically I'm not accepting the story that my mind is telling me. That's super important to me. And then acknowledging what's happening in my life, in my body, my mind, my spirit, and putting truth to that, and naming that truth. I think so often for me, is that I know what's happening in my life, but I can't make truth to it because that means I have to deal with my stuff. So making truth with that. And then always reading. Reading is important to me. I love self-help books. And believe it or not, my sister and I start our mornings every day together. So speaking to my twin is like the way that I start my morning, which is, I don't know how I would start my morning without her. So my twin, I think she's watching, so shout out to my twin. So she keeps me grounded and centered. So yeah, my twins and my family. I mean, I love them. So those are the people that support me when I'm in need.
Okay, great advice, great advice. So switching gears a little bit.
What about you, Sean?
Well, for me, mostly what I do is meditation and music. You know, I love music. I love listening to any type of music that people consider as feel good music, you know, just to get me in good spirits and just meditating. Just listening to, I actually have downloaded a Calm app. The Calm app, that helps me with meditation as well. So that's basically what I do. Just like I said, switching gears a little bit, going back to Shaq. What we want to know right now, we all know it's COVID season. You know, we've been social distancing. What I want to know is the youth that you have encountered. How has COVID-19 affected them?
Whew. So just like what Aaron said and Jermaine, everybody on this call, we're going through this pandemic, but we're also going through a state of emergency. Black people are being hunted and killed every day. So with that being said, and the pandemic, a lot of my young people, this has been this heightened increase of risk that has been in place way before this pandemic, right? Or this killing of Black and brown folks, particularly Black male. But the depression has been gone high, anxiety, substance abuse, suicide ideation. And then because young people are so connected to social media, so censoring or watching stuff on social media, their intake, what they're seeing, not being able to, the decrease of social interaction and more of an increase of negative social interaction. So we see a lot of folks that are now ripped away from these social spaces, now engaging in negative, not by choice, social interactions. So like we have young people that are in very unsupportive environments, have resulted in the increase of dysphoria, particularly around our trans and non-binary young people. And then just a lot of our young people, particularly our trans Black individuals, like having trouble really hiding certain parts of themselves in order to gain approval, to secure safety in spaces for housing, mental health, or getting access to community resources. And then for our young people, so anyone under the age of 18, really social interactions. A lot of our young people spend majority of their time in school. And because school is virtually, that is disconnecting them from the school interaction. So them not being able to engage in sports or clubs, or giving them the opportunity to connect to supportive adults like teachers, coaches, and school counselors. And then for some of our young people that are connected to GSAs, they're just not getting connected, they're not connected. So a lot of them are facing or experiencing depression and anxiety because of this.
Right, that's unfortunate, which brings me to my next question I wanted to ask Aaron. You know, those youth that she just spoke about that are at home, that are used to being out, going to school, getting an outlet, going to other safe spaces, they are now, you know, stuck at home. What advice do you give them to basically maintain their mental health?
So I appreciate that Shaq shared about the youth using social media and how they're kind of bombarded with all of the negative sides of social media, because I have a lot of conversations with especially teenagers about curating their social media in ways that it is very uplifting and supportive. And I try to keep track on my social media of like, who are the popular voices that kids are listening to for positive messages and inspiration and things like that, so that I have a list of suggestions to give to them, because it is really hard for everybody who's having to be home when you're used to being able to, you start your morning together and then you go your separate ways and then you come back and, you spend time together talking about your day, but having to be in the same place with the same people all the time, no matter how much you love them, can be difficult because we all have our little individual things. And so when it comes particularly to the LGBT community, especially anyone who is not out to their family, it is anxiety inducing because you're constantly trying to not be who you are, but wanting to be who you are. And that disconnect that's created within you, is really hard to deal with sometimes. And it can also lead to feelings of depression about your sense of self-worth and your goodness. And so I spend a lot of time reaffirming people about how important they are and how much this is something that I know a lot of my clients struggle with, but I talk about their conception story and all the things that had to happen, because we go back in the calendar and say, okay, what night could you have possibly been conceived? And all the things that have to happen in order for a baby to be here, and how out of all the sperm and all the eggs, you were the one. You were the one that had to be here. Like, even if your parents aren't together anymore or for whatever it is, like, you had to be here. And I want them to feel how special they are and how important it is for them to take up space. And so I really focus on building up their value because I know that once we finish our session, they may not get that anywhere else. And so I go hard, but I say things like, I know that they're going to remember having that uncomfortable conversation with Miss Erin because I'm willing to do it, and I'm okay with that. And I want them to be okay with who they are and how they present. I know that it's difficult, and from the stories that I've heard. And so I take extra time to just make sure that they recognize how important they are and how necessary they are.
Great. And we appreciate that. So basically letting them know that they are important. They
Absolutely.
are here and we are here for you.
Absolutely.
So Jermaine, you're a father, you're a playwright, you're an entrepreneur. You are responsible for, starting out and implementing a few different organizations. Like, what motivates you with everything going on in society right now, just to keep pouring into the community?
Yeah, I really love Black people. I really love our culture. I love our heritage. I love our resilience. I love our swag. I love our beauty. I love the curves of a Black woman. I love the stature and the swag of a Black man. There's something beautiful about little Black kids playing in the park or skateboarding or riding their bikes I love Black people. And I also love the LGBTQ plus community. I see beauty and I see that same resilience in our community. I see us as trend makers. I commented not too long ago on an interview that I was honored to be a part of, that I can't think of any innovation or any change-making or culture-shifting movement where LGBT people, particularly Black LGBT people, weren't involved. And that's from fashion to sports to creativity to civics to politics. Like, we've always been there. So I have a deep and abiding love for our community. I didn't grow up in North Carolina. I grew up in South Florida, and I grew up in a very affluent and affirming gay community. There were gay folk in my family. I grew up watching my gay aunt and her partner. I saw their relationship outlast all of my heterosexual aunt and uncle's relationships. So unlike, some others, I do understand I come from some privilege in that way. Unlike others who've only been bombarded with negative opinions based in heterosexualism about LGBT folk, mine was the opposite. My peers and the role models that I had were beautiful. So, I was actually disappointed when I became an LGBT adult and I realized, it wasn't as easy to have that, house with a picket fence and kids kind of relationship that my aunt had. But, the long and short of it is I love Black folk and I love LGBT folk. And I've always known that any work that I'm ever going to do for the rest of my life is going to be about empowering those communities, empowering the people in those communities, and also showcasing the beauty, the resilience, and greatness that is in those communities.
Thank you, and we definitely appreciate everything that you have to offer to the community. It is a breath of fresh air. So going to the next question, and this question is going to be for all of our panelists, and we're going to start with Shaq. So what do you feel is the most urgent need for the Black LGBTQ community in Charlotte right
now? That's a loaded question.
Mm-hmm.
I think COVID-19 has exposed not only the homeless and the housing crisis in Charlotte, but the lack of resources afforded to marginalized and underserved populations, particularly LGBT communities. I think for me, the unemployment and underemployed, housing stability, and I would be naive not to talk about HIV and how it impacts the Black community, particularly Black men that have sex with Black men. And then violence against our trans women of color. So I know that in 2000 and 2019, there were 26 trans women that were murdered. In 2020, there were 28 trans women that were murdered. And we are halfway through 2020. So the urgency for me is how do we protect all Black women? And that includes our trans women, right? And how do we talk about providing safer housing options for homeless and the people that are experiencing homelessness, right? And we need to start with our underserved population and those that are greatly affected by homelessness. And that is Black and brown folks.
Right, I would definitely have to agree. Aaron, what do you think is the most urgent need?
I would actually have to agree with Shaq. The homelessness and my original response was the violence against trans women. I can't do my work when people don't have a place to live. I cannot do my work when people are worried about if they're going to survive. People cannot come into a space of being ready and willing to really process their emotional selves when they're focused on, am I going to have somewhere to sleep tonight? Am I going to have food? Am I going to survive? And so really focusing in on those issues, just the basic fundamental needs of humans, but specifically for the LGBT community, because they're humans, and making sure that they have the security in those areas.
Okay, and Jermaine?
Yeah, I agree with my fellow panelists. Mine is kind of twofold, and you'll see how they are associated. So the National Medical Association last year, or a couple of years ago, declared that the murders and assaults on trans women were at a pandemic level. So already this year in June, more Black trans women particularly have been killed than all last year, right? So Black trans women are being murdered and then oftentimes misgendered if it's reported in the news or if it's reported in a news publication, they're often misgendered. So I'm excited that here in Charlotte, we're doing some work around that. I know Charlotte Black Pride is doing work around that and other organizations are, but it's a mess. But I think one thing that could even combat that, and this might be the overarching answer, is career building and wealth building, right? Because if trans women have a career and trans women have money, then they're able to not have to do things to put themselves at risk to make money, not have to do things to put themselves at risk for housing. And so it's twofold for me. I mean, certainly when you think about the LGBTQ community, trans women have it the worst.
Right.
Trans women, particularly Black trans women, have it the absolute worst. And unfortunately, many of them don't even get the support they need from us, you know? So they're
Right.
getting it externally and they're getting it internally, and it's a mess. But if we were, and this is some of the work that we're doing in community now, to empower them financially and get them on a career path so that they can have a home and they can have money in their pockets and they can live where they want to live. And if they want to do elective surgery or anything like that, they have the funds and the insurance to do that and to have a quality life.
Right, and I would have to agree with all of you all. Maybe we can all get together and, you know, form some kind of panel to put some more work into, you know, making sure that these areas, you know, we have a solution for them. Earlier, it was mentioned that there is a survey. This is going to conclude this part. What we're going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Afeni so she can talk about our survey results.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, so we're going to switch gears for a moment to discuss the results of the survey. Please keep in mind that this survey is only based on our audience members who completed it. So our first question is, do you identify as a member of the LGBTQ plus community? As you can see here, we have about 53% of our surveyors who selected that they do not. We have about 14% of surveyors who say maybe or they're unsure. And we have about 33% of surveyors who do identify as members of the LGBTQ plus community. Our next question is, to what extent has public representation or lack thereof of Black LGBTQ plus people influenced your perception of the group and or influenced how well you feel represented? We have here a majority of about 43% of surveyors who selected somewhat. We have about 10% who selected not very much, 19% who selected not at all, and we have about 14% who are neutral on the subject. Our next question is, what do you think is the greatest contributing factor to mental health issues in the Black LGBTQ plus community? 43% of our surveyors selected that it is the negative self-feelings because of sexual orientation and or gender identity. We have an even split, as you can see, of 14.3% of surveyors who selected that responses such as a lack of familial support, fear of being stigmatized, coping with discrimination or violence, and feeling isolated or alone. And our final question was, where do you most often experience positive messages of being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and or queer? We have about 38% of surveyors who selected they see these positive messages or receive them from family and or friends. 33% selected that it's from social media. They see or experience these positive messages from social media. About 24% selected entertainment, such as TV, film, and music. And we have one individual response who selected that it is from social media, but it's the space that I curate. If I'm in more public social media spheres, it isn't always as accepting or positive. So Sean, based on the survey results, was there something that stood out to you or the panelists?
I'm really not surprised at the survey results, but I guess what stood out to me the most is the fact that there are a lot of people that doesn't feel, you know, they don't feel confident. They're not confident in themselves. You know, they don't feel like it's okay, you know, to be out and to be who they are wherever they are. You know, I'm not surprised at that. You know, to those people, you know, I would say, you know, love yourself. You know, God is love. You know, make sure, you know, that you have self-care. Make sure that you participate in self-care and take care of yourself.
I think what surprised me the most was the question about sexual orientation or gender identity and how that impacts your mental health. I think that's what I read. I think there's this notion and this narrative that people that are LGBT, that their sole reason of their mental health is because they're LGBT, but people are forgetting that they're people first. So using person-centered language as you're describing someone in the LGBT community. So if this person, like for me, I'm a Black multicultural person, right? So I'm not gonna say my mental health has to do with me being queer, but maybe my mental health issues or problems have stemmed from me being multicultural and coming from another country, right? That could probably be it, and less on more of my identity. I think for folks that are cisgender straight, for them to understand the LGBT community, that their sole reason for individuals to experience mental health issues is because of their identity, which is not. So I just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. I don't know if that's how I read that question. I'm not sure if that's how other folks read it.
I appreciate the individualized response that someone gave about how they curate their social media experience, because that was something that I talked about being very important, that I talk with my clients about. But I also think it's also really good to just make sure that you are seeking out entertainment in books, music, movies, everything that includes people of the LGBTQ plus community, because you need to see that normalized in your everyday experience, so that it's not so, at least in some space, you feel understood and you feel like you can identify, even if that means that ultimately you have to come back to maybe a household or family, friends who don't necessarily understand you. It's good to just have some time where you feel understood.
What surprised me was that, there was a question about where or what makes you feel affirmed, or what spaces have you felt affirmation? And no one, not one person said it was their educational institution. I thought that was really interesting, because in my educational experiences, I was affirmed. I personally was affirmed, and I learned so much more about other Black LGBTQ pioneers, educators, artists, at the institutions where I learned. And so it was interesting that no one said that that was a space or place where they were affirmed.
Okay. Good answers, good answers. So right now we're going to go ahead and move right into the Q&A portion. Most of these questions, well, all of them are pretty much for everyone. We're going to start with Aaron. The question from the audience is, where are the major Black places of worship in Charlotte when it comes to embracing, supporting, and creating a space for the LGBTQ plus community?
So I am actually not a person who practices religion. So I'm unfortunately not going to be able to have a lot of answers for anyone on that. But what I would really encourage, because there was a time when I did practice religion, and I took it upon myself to just be curious about the different denominations within the Christian religion, because that's what I practiced at the time. And so when I moved to Charlotte, I tried different churches. And you might find a place where you want to go more than a couple times, but just to see how it fits. I know this is not the question, but I would also encourage that with your therapists, when you go to seek therapy, remember that it is about goodness of fit and the experience that you have when you're with your therapist, as well as when you're in a place of worship. Do you feel like you can be vulnerable? Because worshiping and having a relationship with a higher power is about vulnerability, as well as going to therapy is about vulnerability. So can you be so authentic to yourself that you can be vulnerable in those spaces? It is a lot of trial and error, and I really hope that in your journey of finding that you're open and curious, but also recognize when you're not getting your needs fulfilled.
Right. Shaq?
I should know this answer. I'm not a big church goer either. I'm very, and if my mom was watching this, she'll probably be upset. But I'm more of a religious person. I'm more of a spiritual person than a religious person. So really, I agree with what Aaron mentioned about being vulnerable. I think that's super important. I spend a lot of my time getting advice and prayer for my sister and my mother. So whenever I'm in doubt, or whenever fear and faith is sharing the same space, I reach out to the people that love and support me for guidance and additional support. And I do a lot of reading. I know there's churches in the community that host spaces for Black and brown folks, but I'm not one of those individuals that that use those spaces.
Okay. Jermaine?
Hey, so I consider myself a progressive Christian. I was certainly raised around a lot of religiosity, but in me finding God and identifying the God of my understanding, I consider myself a progressive Christian. So there are progressive LGBTQ affirming, progressive Christian LGBT affirming churches. And you can look me up on Facebook or Instagram, inbox me, and I can give you some of them. But just to name a few: Unity Fellowship Church Charlotte, Sacred Souls Community Church, Wedgwood Church, the Movement Church, not to be mistaken for like the Movement School on Freedom Drive, but the Movement Church, I think they're off of Independence Boulevard, and the City Church. All of these churches are now, of course, having service and fellowshipping online, so you can find them online anywhere. And I encourage you to look them up. I especially can give a thumbs up because I've attended these churches, to Unity Fellowship Church Charlotte and to Sacred Souls Community Church. Those are two churches that, you know, I put my reputation on. But for anybody who's watching, who considers themselves a person of Christian faith and is struggling with your sexuality, your sexual orientation, and your faith, I just want you to know that Jesus, like if you read the red letters in the Bible, that's everything that Jesus said. Jesus condemned a lot of people in the Bible and a lot of type of folk. More than anything, Jesus condemned the religious leaders of that day. But Jesus never, ever, 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 ever said anything condemning about LGBT folk. As a matter of fact, even though the word homosexual exists in the contemporary Bibles that we read now, it actually was not even a word. Like that word literally didn't exist. So that means somewhere in translation over the ages, somebody added that word. So yeah, there were other writers who did speak directly against homosexuality and lesbianism, but those folk weren't God. The person who Christians consider the Son of God and the representative of God never did. As a matter of fact, spent a lot of time with tax collectors who were considered the scum of that day and prostitutes, right? So Jesus was alive today, you know, he would be on Betty's Ford Road and he would be downtown on the Host Road, you know, and he would be over in the Tent City, you know what I'm saying? And he would be over on Sugar Creek, you know, like where the prostitutes are, evangelizing and helping them see a better way of being. That's really the God of the Bible. He would be a radical. He would be protesting. He would be out with Protest Charlotte. I don't know if he'd be busting glasses of retail centers, but he would certainly be protesting and he would be lobbying. He was a radical in that way. And so, you know, if you inbox me, I can send you a lot of literature, not gay propaganda, but literature written by former pastors who, when they really read the Bible in its original language, realized, oh my God, I've been, you know, preaching hate all these years, like heterosexual pastors. Some great literature out there, easy to read. If you inbox me, I can send it to you.
Thank you, Jermaine. I consider myself a Christian and I feel like I'm more spiritual. The advice I would give is, like when I came to Charlotte, I just visited different churches. And because you are LGBT doesn't necessarily mean you have to go to a LGBT church. There are some other churches here that are affirming churches as well. Like, you know, since I've been in Charlotte, attended a few, and I regularly attend New Life Fellowship Church off of the South with the pastor John P. Keith. So again, you know, just, you know, figure out, you know, what your spirit needs, what fuels you. And when you get to that place and you feel fed, you know, that's where you should be. So that would be my advice. We have more audience questions. The next question, I'm going to start with Shaq. Shaq, what do you think is important for Black people in the LGBTQ plus community who are struggling with identity to know?
Hmm. That's a good question. I think for me is how I would answer that would be lean into discomfort, take up space, as much space as you possibly can. I think so often, I know when I was growing up, there was this phrase my mother always used to tell me, always be seen and never be heard. And that always stuck with me. That stuck with me, and I never knew what it meant until I grew up, and I realized it was important for me to physically be seen but not be heard. So I say, when I say take up space, I say be seen and also be heard. Um, and also know that you can't pray depression away. That's my thoughts. And support images and thoughts that support who you are as an individual, not what people think you are. And always show up as your best self. And the last thing I would say would be what comes out of your cup is for others, and what stays in your cup is yours. And I think so often folks get so infatuated with giving all of themselves that they forget to give them their self. So that's why I use an analogy about whatever comes out of your cup is for them, and whatever stays in your cup is yours. And I think that's super important, not to lose yourself in that process.
Good, good. Aaron?
When it comes to identity, I think it's important to remember that it's a process, and that wherever you are, that's where you are in your development, and that's okay. There's no playbook, there's no timeline that you're supposed to be meeting or schedule that you're supposed to be meeting of when you're supposed to do things and when you're supposed to present a certain way. So it's a process, and wherever you are, like, be curious about that moment, be curious about that space, and see, what do you like about who you are, what do you dislike about who you are, how can you grow and become a better version of yourself, like Shaq was saying. It's a process, and I think for anyone who's struggling with integrating into their identity in the LGBTQ community, I think it's important to remember that there's nothing that you're supposed to be doing that says that it's okay for you to be who you are right now. It's just okay to be who you are right now because that's where you are.
Right, right. And Jermaine?
Yeah, so Black Pride was created because myself and the co-founders of Black Pride, Monica Simpson, Corey Handy, and Damon Blackman, we didn't like what we saw. We didn't like the lack of Black LGBT visibility in our city. The only time we saw other Black LGBT folk at the time was late at night at somebody's club. I was like, well, no, like, why, when I go to the mall, I'm not seeing couples holding hands, and I'm not seeing families, or, you know, at a concert, or places and spaces that I know we also enjoy. And so you are, you know, for those of us who are people of faith, we believe we've been created, but you are a co-creator of your destiny, your life. And so you can create the life that you want for yourself, and you can create the community and the society that you want for yourself. And I'm really a witness of that. I've been able to excel as a openly, and I use the term same gender loving, but I identify as gay. So I've been able to excel as a Black gay man in every single aspect that I have chosen to endeavor in, whether that's arts. I worked at the Harvey Gantt Center. I worked for every art institution in Charlotte, the Gantt, the Mint Museum, the Levine Museum and I'm not boasting, I'm saying I walked in all of those spaces authentically. Everybody's always known who I was. I've been a part of political campaigns, community-based, every aspect. I've done public health. Everywhere I've gone authentically, and I've gone and shifted those things and made those environments, because many of them were not, more affirming for people who looked like me and people who loved like me. You can do it. Was I met with resistance? Absolutely. Was it a struggle? Absolutely. Did sometimes I feel like giving up? Absolutely. Did I lose things sometimes? Yeah. But the payback, oh my God, the payback was residual, because there are people watching this today who are walking in those footsteps that I've already treaded. I know that. And then somebody did it for me before I got there. So you are a co-creator of your world.
Right, right. And I would definitely have to agree. Just some quick advice that I would give is that you can only be you. You know, only make sure that you only surround yourself around people that accept you for who you are, people that make you feel good. At the end of the day, people that don't do anything for you, their opinion, you know, really doesn't matter. So that would be the advice I would give. Some great advice. Next question from the audience, and we'll start with Aaron on this one. What do you wish you could tell your younger self that would have helped you along your journey?
So many things. I mean, I think the biggest thing that I practice right now is just being curious. I think as a younger person, I always thought that adults knew everything. and now as an adult, I know they don't. But there's also sometimes like this ego or arrogance that happens with adults where they're not open to learning from younger people. And I just refuse to be that person. And so it's not even just with younger people, but anybody that I encounter, just be curious. Be curious about yourself, be curious about others, be curious about the way the world is working around you, because there's always just something to know, something to learn. I wish I would have been more curious as a child, but then also speak up about your curiosities. And when people don't have the answer for you, don't let that be the end of the curiosity. Stay curious.
Thank you. And unfortunately, this is our final question. We'll go to Shaq.
Answering the same question. Okay.
Yeah, question.
For me, my younger self, I wish I was more in tune with my sexuality. If I could have told my younger self, I would say, when someone invites you into their world, show up as yourself and no one else. I think growing up in latter stages of my life, I showed up as someone else, and I lost a piece of me.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know how to get it back. And I didn't care to get it back then. But is show up as your true self, and set clear boundaries. And no means no. Like, I would say no, because I have trouble with saying no today. So I would say no, and honoring your true feelings. And love. I mean, that's my number one thing is to lean into love. And when being served and playing, is always move with love.
Great, great. Jermaine?
Man, I would tell old scrawny, big-headed Jermaine to relax. Like, you know, I had it all planned out. You know, I had a timeline, and you know, I was going to be married by this time. I was going to graduate. I'd be CEO of a music corporation. But like, I had it all planned out. But I would tell myself to relax, to enjoy the journey, to have a timeline, to have a plan, but be flexible, you know. And someone mentioned the word arrogance. Like, it was so arrogant to think that, like, you know, like life isn't going to happen, you know, like life isn't going to interrupt my plan. Like I have that much control over my destiny, or that my plan is actually what's best for me. Like, I know, like, as if I knew at 21 what was best for me in the long run, right? The arrogance of that. But moreover, I would have just relaxed. I feel like, you know, I'm buck wild now that I'm in my 40s, but, you know, I was such a prude when I was younger. And that was based on things that I'd seen happen around me, from family members and other folk who live very risky lives. And I just didn't want to, I was so afraid of taking that path that I think I just was just a prude and just was like, I'm doing this, I'm not doing anything else. But I would have explored a lot more, and I would have just relaxed. But I'm making up for it now.
Right, right. Great stuff. So it sounds like everyone It's basically saying just be yourself and relax and just enjoy life and enjoy growing up. So we're gonna conclude, and first I want to say thank you so much to Aaron. Aaron, we appreciate you. I'm gonna give you an opportunity for some final words for us.
I am just really grateful to have been a part of this conversation as a therapist, but as someone who's not a part of the LGBT community, I have learned so much. I've actually been jotting down notes this whole time because it's really good to just speak with people so that I have things to tell my clients from people who have actually lived the experience. So I'm really grateful to have met all of you and to be able to participate.
Thank you. Thank you. Jermaine Nakia Lee, thank you so much for your insight and for being here as a panelist for us. What are your final thoughts?
Well, I just want you guys to know I love you. Like and I'm saying this to everybody who's watching. I don't know who many of you I probably don't know, but I just want you to know I love you. If you had the desire to tune in, if you are a non-LGBT person and you had the desire to tune in to learn more, to become more affirming, more understanding, more empathetic, I love you for that. And if you are an LGBT person, an LGBT person of color, or a non-LGBT person of color, then you're my sister and you're my brother, and I love you for that. And I think that during these very, very uncertain times politically, uncertain times as it relates to the health of our nation, uncertain times as it relates to the lives of Black and Brown people, like we need love. It sounds cliche, but we need love. And, some of us have more capacity for that than others. And I'm just in a space right now where my heart is just wide open. And I just want you to know I love you. I hope you'll follow me online. I hope that you will inbox me. I hope to get to know some of you all. And when life gets a little less dangerous to meet, then maybe we can meet up and maybe synergize around doing some of the things that we talked about on this call.
Great, great. Shaq, what are your final thoughts? Thank you so much, for being here. Your insight is very important. It's something that we needed. What are your final thoughts on today?
Well, I just want to say thank you, Shane, and thank you for all the panelists that participated on this call and those that tuned in. Thank you so much for sharing space with us this evening. And just like what Jermaine said, love, I use the word love very fluently because I do love folks. But I'm just so grateful that we had this conversation. This conversation is a small conversation for a much larger conversation. So I'm just happy to be a part of it as a Black queer individual from Toronto, Canada, speaking on a call with other Black individuals. So I'm just grateful to be a part of this conversation and grateful that folks are, paying attention to this, necessary topic about Black folks and mental health. It's important. So thank you.
Thank you, Shaq. What I would say, my final thoughts are, following up, I need you, you need me out there. Let's spread love. It's enough hate going around. I think the only thing that's going to fix it is us loving and caring for each other. And, continue to practice self-care. You can't give from an empty cup. I just want to also say thank you so much to the Gantt Center for this Unmasked series and the other live shows that you all put on. It is much needed in the community. There have been different topics that you won't see in other places, but we are having these conversations here at the Gantt. Right now, again, we thank you so much, viewers. I'm gonna give it back over to Afeni.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for your words, for your input tonight, and for leading tonight's discussion. The Gantt Center has been able to provide programs and vital conversations because of supporters like yourself. With our text to give option, you can continue your support in a convenient way by texting Unmasked to 345-345. Your contributions allow us to continue our work and further and expand our mission. Of course, we thank you all for tuning in and for your powerful questions and your comments tonight. Until next time, as always, please be safe and take care. Good night.